Sign it and leave, you have no business being here. My mother-in-law, Elaine, pushed 6 pages across the dining room table with 2 fingers. We had buried her husband 4 days earlier. I looked down at the document, then back at her. Good morning to you, too. Nobody laughed, that was fine, it hadn't really been a joke. Elaine sat at the head of the table, in Bob's usual chair, wearing the same black cardigan she'd worn at the funeral luncheon. Her daughter Denise sat across from me with a yellow legal pad and a cup of untouched coffee. My husband, Mark, sat beside me. That should have made me feel less alone. It didn't. Claire, he said quietly, you don't need to understand any of this. Of everything said in that room, that was the sentence I remembered most clearly, not because it was the cruelest. Because it came from my husband. I looked back at the first page, family settlement and consent agreement. I'd been told we were meeting to discuss a few administrative matters involving Bob's estate. Nobody had mentioned signing anything. I read the first paragraph, then the second. There was language about consent to administration, waiver of objections, acknowledgement of certain assumptions about assets, and something concerning Bob's interest in a small commercial property outside Westerville. I stopped. If this is just a formality, why do you need my signature? Elaine's expression hardened. We already explained that. No, you told me to sign it. That's different. Denise tapped her pen against the table. Everybody else already agreed. We're waiting on you. Then you've had more time with this than I have. It's standard, she said. Standard for what? Elaine exhaled like I was deliberately being difficult. Your signature allows everything to move forward. I looked at Mark. Did you read it? He didn't answer. Mark, Dad just died, he said. Mom doesn't need you turning this into some legal argument. I stared at him. Did you read it? His silence answered me. I closed the document. I'm not signing this today. Elaine leaned forward. Then don't expect this family to forget what you're doing. I stood. What exactly am I doing? Making things harder when my husband has been dead 4 days. That one hurt, not because Elaine was right, because her grief was real. I had loved Bob too. So I kept my voice low. I'm sorry you're going through this. I loved Bob too, but I'm not signing 6 pages I was handed 10 minutes ago. I walked out. Mark followed me. We drove home in silence. Halfway there, he finally spoke. You could have just signed it and let Mom get through 1 week without another problem. I looked out the window. Did you read it? His hands tightened around the steering wheel. There was my answer. So why were you asking me to sign it? He didn't respond. That night Mark slept downstairs. Around 11, I noticed a voicemail from a Columbus number I didn't recognize. I played it. Ms. Bennett, this is Margaret Sloan. I represented Robert Bennett. He left instructions that I contact you after his death. Please call me when you're able. I listened twice. Bob hadn't just hired an attorney. He had left instructions specifically for me. The next morning, I called Margaret from my car. She answered immediately. Claire Bennett, yes, I'm glad you called. You represented Bob. I did. How recently? There was a pause. Would you rather discuss this in person? Yes. Her office was downtown in an old brick building. Margaret met me herself. She was calm, professional, and completely unsurprised by my anxiety. Once we sat down, I asked the question I had been afraid to ask. Did Bob change his will? Yes. Did he leave me something? Margaret almost smiled. If by something you mean a hidden fortune, no. I laughed despite myself. Thank God, that's not usually the reaction I get. I've had enough surprises this week. Margaret folded her hands. Bob's primary concern was Elaine. He wanted her financially protected for the rest of her life. That sounds like him. It does. Then Margaret told me something I hadn't expected. Bob didn't trust Denise with certain financial matters. I stared at her. Why? He had provided significant financial assistance to her over the years. Some was completely legitimate. Mortgage payments, tuition, repairs, medical expenses. But toward the end, he became concerned about several transactions. What kind of transactions? One involved his interest in a commercial property. I remembered the paragraph I'd read at Elaine's table. Margaret continued. Another involved an authorization he didn't clearly remember signing. My stomach tightened. Did Bob think Denise forged his signature? He never accused her of that. Then what did he say? He said he was no longer certain every document placed in front of him matched what he believed. He'd agreed to. I thought about the phone call Bob had made to me 6 months earlier. At the time, I had been sitting in my car outside my mother's physical therapy office when Bob called. Bob and I weren't phone call people. We liked each other, but our relationship was mostly Thanksgiving, Cleveland Brown's complaints, and him asking whether I wanted him to look at whatever appliance had started making a strange noise. That day he'd asked me something completely different. What happens if somebody signs something and later isn't sure what they signed? I had stopped eating my almonds. What kind of something? Paperwork. What paperwork? He had laughed. Then he'd asked about wills, powers of attorney, property transfers, and witnessing signatures. Finally, I asked him directly, Bob, does this involve Mark or Denise? There was a long pause. I don't want to accuse anybody of anything until I know I'm not just being an old paranoid man. I had given him the names of 3 probate attorneys I trusted. A week later, Bob texted me. Went with Sloan, thanks, that was the last time we discussed it. Now Margaret was sitting across from me explaining why. Bob removed Mark as his nominated personal representative, she said. I blinked. He did, yes. Why? He wanted the accounting handled by somebody independent of the family. That hurt Mark more than money ever could. Bob hadn't removed him from the inheritance. He had removed him from control. And me? I asked. Margaret nodded. You have a limited supervisory role under the trust. I stared at her. Why? Because Bob asked for it. That doesn't answer my question. She smiled slightly. He said you were the only person involved who didn't need the money. I leaned back. That is both flattering and insulting. I told him something similar. I looked down at my hands. He never told me. No, why? He trusted your judgment. He didn't want to put you in the middle before he had to. That sentence stayed with me. Bob wasn't affectionate with speeches. He showed love differently. He fixed your garage door. He filled your gas tank when he borrowed your car. He arrived 20 minutes early with a flashlight. That was Bob. Margaret slid a document toward me. You should know something else. The settlement agreement your family gave you isn't based on Bob's final estate plan. I looked at her. It isn't. No. The document they gave you appears to rely on an older plan. How old? 2 years. My stomach dropped. And the newer plan, signed 4 months before Bob died. I knew immediately what that meant. Elaine and Denise either didn't know Bob had changed things, or they knew and hoped nobody else did. When I got home, Mark was reheating leftover chicken. Where were you? Meeting Margaret Sloan. His fork stopped. Dad's lawyer, yes. What did she want? To explain what Dad changed. He looked at me. How much did he leave you? The question came too quickly. I stared at him. Nothing. He looked relieved, then irritated. Claire, come on. No. You asked the first question that came into your head. What was I supposed to ask? How about whether your mother's protected? That shut him up. She is, I said. Bob made sure of that. Mark nodded. Okay, but he also ordered an accounting of several transactions involving Denise. His face changed. This is what lawyers do. You take a family problem and turn it into a case. Your father hired the lawyer. Dad helped Denise all the time. I know. Then why are they digging through her life? They're reviewing his transactions. He shook his head. You're making this worse. I looked at him. Why are you this upset? I'm not. He was. I just didn't know why yet. The next few weeks answered that question. Daniel Reeves, the independent fiduciary Bob had appointed, began reviewing the transactions. Most were legitimate. The furnace Bob paid for, authorized. His grandson's tuition, authorized. The mortgage payments after Denise's divorce, authorized. I actually defended those transactions when Elaine complained. Bob was allowed to give Denise his money, I said. If he gave it willingly, then that's the end of it. But not everything was that simple. One afternoon, Daniel sent several documents for review. One concerned the commercial property. At the bottom was Bob's signature, below it was a witness line, and beside it was Mark's signature. I stared at it. When Mark came home, I placed the document on the kitchen counter. Did you witness Bob sign this? He froze. Where did you get that? That's not an answer. He rubbed the back of his neck. No, you didn't see him sign it. No. Then why did you sign as the witness? Denise brought it over. She said Dad had already signed it. They forgot to get the witness part done. I stared at him. You knew that's not what witnessing means. I thought I was fixing paperwork. You signed a legal document claiming you saw something you didn't see. I made a mistake. Yes, he looked angry. Dad was helping Denise. She was having problems. That doesn't explain why you signed it. He looked away. Then I asked the question that mattered. When your mother gave me that settlement agreement, did you know your father had started questioning documents involving Denise? His silence was longer this time. I knew Dad had been asking questions. What kind? I don't know. Mark, he sighed. Denise told me Dad was getting confused. And you believed her. I didn't know what to believe. That was possible, but it wasn't enough. So when your mother told me to sign and leave, you knew there was at least a chance something was wrong. I didn't know that, but you knew something. He didn't answer. I picked up the document. I'm not your lawyer, Mark. I'm not Denise's lawyer, and I'm not going to help you explain this away. I didn't ask you to, no. You asked me to sign something so nobody would have to explain anything at all. That night, I slept with the bedroom door locked. For the first time in 11 years of marriage, I locked my husband out. 3 days later, Denise's attorney challenged my role in Bob's trust. Elaine called me. Looks like Bob didn't trust you as much as you thought. I almost laughed. I never said Bob trusted me more than anyone. You've certainly acted like it. No, Elaine. I refused to sign something I hadn't read, and look what that started. I took a breath. Bob requested the accounting before he died. Silence. Then she said something unexpected. Denise's lawyer says you have a conflict of interest. He may have a point. That surprised her. I met with Margaret that afternoon. She explained that because I was married to Mark and Mark's conduct was connected to a disputed transaction, it might be cleaner for me to step away from certain decisions. I agreed. If stepping back protects the process, I'll do it, Margaret nodded. Bob knew you were married to Mark when he appointed you. I know, he trusted you to put the process ahead of yourself. I thought about that. I'll do exactly that. A few days later, Denise asked to meet me. We sat at a panera halfway between our houses. No lawyers, no Elaine, no Mark, just us. She looked exhausted. I wasn't stealing from Dad, she said. I never said you were. Everyone thinks I was. I think you were scared. She looked at me. My divorce destroyed me. I nearly lost my house. I had to call Dad because I couldn't make the mortgage. I understand. No, you don't. You're right. I don't know what your divorce felt like. She looked away. But I do know what shame feels like. Her eyes came back to mine. I never forged Dad's signature. I didn't say you did. You implied it. No. I asked why you didn't have him sign the paperwork properly if he agreed with it. She grabbed her purse. This was a mistake. She left. A week later, we went into mediation. Elaine, Denise, Mark, their attorneys, Margaret, and Daniel were all in one conference room. Daniel explained that the purpose wasn't to punish anyone. It was to determine which transactions Bob had authorized and administer the estate according to the documents he'd actually signed. The easy transactions came first: tuition, furnace repairs. Mortgage payments, all authorized. Then Daniel reached the commercial property document. The room changed instantly. Mark's attorney whispered something to him. Mark took a breath. I signed as a witness. Denise stared at him. Mark continued. I didn't see Dad sign it. Elaine closed her eyes. Denise brought it to my house, he said. She told me Dad had already signed it, and they had forgotten to have the signature witnessed. Denise immediately spoke. That isn't exactly what I said. Mark turned toward her. Yes, it is. I said Dad wanted the paperwork finished. You said he'd already signed it. He had. I didn't see him do it. Mark swallowed. I shouldn't have signed the witness line. Silence. Then Denise looked at him. You knew what we were doing. I knew Dad was helping you. You knew about the property. I knew what you told me. You're acting like I showed up with some mysterious piece of paper. I didn't. Say that you knew. No, Mark said. I didn't. Then Elaine finally spoke. Yes, Denise. Everyone looked at her. Your brother did one stupid thing. Don't make him responsible for everything you did. Denise stared at her mother. You're taking his side now. I'm telling the truth. Elaine admitted that she had known Bob was questioning some transactions. She had chosen not to confront Denise because she thought Bob would eventually calm down and help his daughter again. She wasn't trying to steal anything. She was trying to protect her daughter. But protecting someone from consequences can sometimes make the consequences worse. The final settlement wasn't dramatic. Nobody went to prison. Nobody became rich. Bob's legitimate gifts to Denise remained legitimate. The disputed amounts were adjusted against Denise's eventual inheritance with a repayment arrangement for part of the money. The commercial property remained protected. Elaine remained financially secure. Mark agreed to cooperate fully with the remaining review. Nobody got everything they wanted. Which was probably why the settlement worked. When we walked out, Mark caught up with me near the elevators. Claire, I stopped. I need to tell you something. Okay, I knew enough to know you shouldn't sign that agreement. I already knew, but hearing him say it hurt differently. I knew Dad had questions. I knew Denise was scared. I knew that if you started reading, you'd ask questions nobody wanted asked. Then why did you do it? He looked at the floor. Because disappointing you was easier than standing up to them. That sentence broke something inside me, not because he didn't love me, because he had loved me in a way that had become convenient. He trusted me to be reasonable. He trusted me not to scream. He trusted me to forgive. And every time his family wanted something, I became the person he expected to bend. You can go home, I told him. His face fell. What does that mean? It means you're going home. I'm going back to the apartment. Are you leaving me? I don't know. For once, he didn't argue. I moved into a furnished apartment near my mother's assisted living community. Mark hired his own attorney. Then, surprisingly, he started telling the truth. He told his attorney exactly what he had done. He stopped covering for Denise. He stopped pretending that keeping peace meant keeping everyone happy. We eventually started marriage counseling. It wasn't magical, it wasn't easy. For months, I lived separately while we tried to understand what had happened to our marriage. One day, Mark admitted something that hurt almost more than his mistake. Whenever his mother or sister wanted something, he had spent years asking himself which person would be easiest to disappoint. Usually that person was me, because I was reasonable, because I didn't make scenes, because I would eventually forgive him. He had mistaken my patience for permission. I realized I'd made my own mistake too. For years I'd said it's fine when things weren't fine. I'd chosen peace over confrontation. But peace can become a bad habit when only one person keeps paying for it. Months later, I returned to work part-time as an estate planning and elder law attorney. One of my first clients was a widow who arrived with a grocery bag full of documents. My son says I shouldn't worry about any of this, she said. I opened the bag, bank statements, insurance forms. A deed, beneficiary paperwork, I smiled. I'm going to disagree with your son, she laughed. Is something wrong? Maybe not. I pulled out the first document. But let's worry about the paperwork. Nearly a year after Bob's death, I went to the cemetery alone. I carried one photocopied page from his notes. On it were questions about his accounts. And underneath them was a short line. Claire, she told me not to sign anything I don't understand. Good advice, should have taken it sooner, I smiled. Yeah, Bob, I whispered. Probably, I finally understood something that day. I had always said I never told Mark's family I was a probate attorney. That wasn't exactly true. I hadn't hidden it. They simply hadn't cared enough to ask, and I had helped them underestimate me by deciding that correcting them wasn't worth the argument. I wasn't doing that anymore. Bob's estate didn't make me rich, Denise didn't go to prison, Elaine never became the mother-in-law I wished she'd been, and Mark and I didn't magically repair 11 years of problems. But Denise had to answer for what she'd done. Elaine had to face the fact that protecting her daughter had helped make things worse. Mark had to stop calling avoidance loyalty. And I had to learn that being the reasonable person in a family didn't mean volunteering to be the person everyone could dismiss. 4 days after Bob died, I had sat at Elaine's dining room table while she pushed 6 pages toward me. Sign it and leave, she'd said. Mark had told me I didn't need to understand. He was right about one thing. There had been something in that room I didn't understand. It just wasn't the paperwork, it was my marriage. I had finally learned how to read it. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is slow down and read before you sign, whether it's a document or the people sitting across the table from you.